Well, today we are beginning a new series on the book of Ecclesiastes. We're calling it Under the Sun. And as that video asked, what are we chasing after in life and why? Have you ever chased something that the world said, hey, you should chase after this, and you did, and after you pursued it like you were supposed to, did it kind of fall short of what you hoped it would be? Well, there's an entire book of the Bible devoted to wrestling with questions like this, and it's the book of Ecclesiastes. We're not the first generation who has ever wrestled with, the big questions of life. In fact, it's completely normal to wonder about and to have questions about the good, bad, and ugly of life. The wisest king who ever lived, Solomon, also wondered about these things and had questions about these things. And he wrote a book of the Bible trying to maybe answer some of that, or just understand it better in some cases, because there's not an answer for everything. But on the back of the pew this morning, you'll find an introduction to the book of Ecclesiastes that'll give you some information about the book, give you some background and context that'll just kind of help you understand what Solomon talks about throughout this book that we're going to look at in this series. So let me encourage you, grab one of those and then maybe just read through that this week and then file it away for future use, in your Bible reading in years to come. But Bible scholars are pretty confident Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay, so it's included in the section of the Old Testament we call Poets and Wisdom, or Poetry and Wisdom. Most Bibles, you may have picked up on this, aren't arranged in exact chronological order. It's arranged more based on the type of writing that it is, and so this book falls within that wisdom poetry section of the Old Testament. So you got Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon in this section of the Bible. That's what these types of books are. So again, King Solomon, he writes most of the book of Proverbs, and as you would guess, wrote the Song of Solomon as well, has his name in it. But again, it's believed Solomon wrote Song of Solomon towards the beginning of his reign, wrote Proverbs kind of at the beginning, middle of his reign, and then wrote Ecclesiastes toward the end of his life when he had learned some lessons the hard way. So this book contains a lot of the reflections of a man who has everything and then discovers what's really worth having in the end. And if I could just kind of give you his whole mindset of the meaning of life, just from an earthly point of view, just from a physical, earthly perspective, it's found in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 1. So if you got your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. And we're going to see what Solomon says right here at the beginning and kind of gives a big theme for where things are headed. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Aren't you glad you came to church today? And maybe you're thinking, why did I even take the time to come if everything is meaningless? Well, hold on, there is a point to all this. Now, King Solomon, of all people, had everything a man, especially in his time, everything a man could want. When Solomon first became king after the death of his father David, we read this. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. A verse later, Solomon says this. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I'm only a little child. He's actually around 20 years old at this point, but he's saying, I don't know anything about what I'm supposed to do. I'm only a little child and don't know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people. You have chosen a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you've asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I'll give you what you've not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. All right, so Solomon is king. He's got this encounter here with God, and so now he's the most wise and discerning person who has ever lived, and eventually would be one of the most wealthy. We read in the Old Testament that Solomon eventually had 25 tons of gold. If you adjust that for modern inflation, that's around $14 trillion. If you were to walk up to somebody on the side of the road and said, hey, would you be interested in having what Solomon had? I mean, everybody would say, yes, absolutely. And yet Solomon says at this point in his life, towards the end of his life here in Ecclesiastes, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. Why? How could you have all this wisdom, knowledge, power, wealth, influence, a life that most people would dream of, and then say it's meaningless? Most of you are probably familiar with who Tom Brady is. He's the most successful NFL quarterback who has ever played the game. He's one of those athletes that was just so successful that you either love him or you hate him. There's kind of not really an in-between when it comes to Brady for most people. It's kind of you love him or you hate him. But one thing, whether you love him or hate him, one thing anybody could appreciate was his approach towards success, his approach towards winning in the NFL. Every part of his life, from his fitness to what he ate to his meticulous schedule that he had for himself every single day, was so fine-tuned and was geared toward success. And it led to him having more Super Bowl wins by himself than any NFL franchise in the history of the NFL, at least in the Super Bowl era. In the middle of his career, just in the middle of it, he was already a multimillionaire. He was the face of the NFL. He was married to a supermodel wife. And ladies, as you look at this picture, you probably think he ain't too hard on the eyes either. All right, so Tom Brady was living a life that most people would dream of. But after his third Super Bowl win, he sat down for an interview, and he was asked about how he felt about his life, about where he was at this point. And this is what he said: there's times when I'm not the person I want to be. Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still feel like there's something greater out there for me? You know, we think people who aren't satisfied with life maybe tend to be ones who don't have as much as others, but even the most successful people in the world struggle with this, feel this way. There's got to be something else. There's got to be more to life than just this. And Solomon uses the word meaningless to describe, even when you think about everything he had, to describe how things were, how he felt about a lot of things. But there's something important we need to just pause here and think about. Something important about the original Hebrew word that's translated in our English Bibles as meaningless. Maybe your version has vanity there instead of meaningless. But there is something important we need to understand here. That original Hebrew word is havel. All right, and it's really hard to translate. It's a word that's hard to translate kind of into a word that we would have in English that really captures the whole idea. So maybe the best way to think about this is a word picture. All right, so havel, think smoke, think vapor. That's kind of the picture we should have. And if we think about it through that imagery, I think we get the metaphor that Solomon is talking about here. I know we're in the middle of summer right now, so here in the South it's hot, it's humid, maybe so hot and humid for so long now that it's hard to imagine that we ever have cold weather here. But I want you to use your imagination, and I want you to go back to last winter when we had that huge snowstorm. All right, so just think back to a time maybe where you can remember it was the coldest you can ever remember. You walk outside, you breathe out. What do you see? See your breath, right? You see that vapor that just rises. I don't know if your kid ever did this, but I have seen it before. I've seen videos of it before, and it's really cute. When a kid goes out, when it's cold enough, for the very first time they go outside and they breathe and they see their breath, what do they try to do sometimes? They try to grab it, right? Because it looks like something you can hold on to. And so they reach out and they try to grab it, and it just goes right through their fingers. Or it blows away before they can even try to get a hold of it. That's the kind of thing Solomon is talking about here. He's not saying that there's nothing good in this world. He's not saying that there isn't any beauty in the world, or that that we can't even find meaning in anything. But the idea is that just when you start to enjoy it, maybe tragedy strikes, or injustice happens. And so you grab at it. Whew, it's gone. Right through your fingers. Life is constantly unpredictable. It's unstable. And in Solomon's description, it's like chasing after the wind. Everything he says is Havel. That's his basic motto. And it's a downer, okay? It is. It's a downer. So why is he saying this? One of Solomon's goals here in writing this book is to try to target all the ways that we try to build meaning and purpose in our lives apart from God. Because Solomon would do this. Solomon starts out well, but then he hits a really dark period in his life where he doesn't do that last thing that God said and follow his decrees. And he tries to find meaning in life in anything and everything. And he had all the resources that you could possibly imagine to try and do that. And he says, it's like trying to grab smoke. It's gone. Solomon knows human nature. He's the wisest person who ever lived. And he knows that we can spend so much of our time and energy in things that don't have lasting significance, that don't have an eternal impact. And so he gives reality checks a lot throughout this book. Look at verses 3 through 10. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning to its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. It's talking about how the streams flow into the ocean, evaporation, and it rains again, and just over and over and over again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was already here long ago. It was here before our time. Has anybody ever seen the movie Groundhog Day? Anybody seen that before? All right, so when I was working on this sermon this week and I read those verses 3 through 10, this movie just pops into my mind as what he's talking about here. This movie where Bill Murray, his character is this selfish TV weatherman, and he's covering Groundhog Day in Pennsylvania, and he finds himself stuck in this time loop that he can't get out of. So he wakes up at 6 a.m. on February 2nd, and he's forced to relive the same day over and over and over again. So when he realizes what's happening, he tries to leave the town, and maybe it would stop. But every time he tries to leave, his path is blocked or something happens, and he can't get out. So he realizes, I'm stuck. I can't get out of this cycle of living the same day over and over again. So then he just approaches each day, well, I'm just going to seek as much pleasure as I can. I'm going to manipulate people so that they'll benefit me because there's no long-term consequences. I'm just going to wake up and have to live the same day again. But eventually that becomes depressing to him, and he becomes disillusioned, and he starts to kind of just do crazy things like letting a groundhog drive the truck that he's in and drives it off of a cliff. He's like, hey, no big deal. I'm just going to wake up again and live the same day over. Now, spoiler alert, it does have a happy ending to the movie. But Solomon has used all his great resources in living and observing life under the sun, and he comes to the conclusion, It's just this repetitive cycle over which we really have no control. For all the human effort that takes place in the world and has taken place in the world century after century, for the most part, things are kind of the same. I mean, sure, we develop technology, nations rise and fall, but ask a mountain and see if it cares. It was there long before any of us. Be there long after we're gone. The ocean will still be breaking on the beach. The sun is still going to rise and set. Time is going to eventually erase us. And most of what we spend our energy and everything else chasing after. Solomon uses the phrase under the sun 29 times. Uses it a lot, 29 times throughout this book. And like with the word meaningless and the Hebrew word havel, okay, there's something important we need to understand about this phrase when he uses it throughout this book. Solomon is writing from a viewpoint that, for the most part, deliberately leaves out heaven's perspective, leaves out the reality of God, His plan and His promises, and how that changes everything. Ecclesiastes, for the most part, describes what life is like under the sun only from the experience of the curse of sin and the effect it's had on us and the effect it has on this world. But occasionally he breaks in to remind us there is more to life than just what's under the sun. So in verses 3 through 10, he says, what profit is all this? What ultimate advantage do we come away with when everything is over under the sun? Look at verse 11. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. When we pass away, most likely there will be a funeral in which people will attend, maybe 20, maybe 200, who knows? And after that funeral, a group of family and friends will most likely get together and they will have a meal, and they will have a good time. They will have a good time sharing memories and laughing together and crying together as they remember our lives, the life of the person who has passed away. And they'll do that for several hours. But then they have to go back to work because most likely somebody was covering for them so they could leave that morning and go to the funeral. And that evening they'll go back to their families and to their home. They'll sit down and they'll watch TV, maybe a rerun of a sitcom. And in a few weeks to a matter of the month, they'll have mostly forgotten about that memorial service. Now, of course, our immediate family members and closest friends, our memory will come up in their minds throughout the year at different times, but for the most part, as time goes on, will be forgotten. Again, aren't you glad you came to church today? But that's one of the powerful things about the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon tells it like it really is under the sun. And what he means by that phrase, under the sun. He continues in verse 12. I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who's ever ruled Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly, but I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. What does he mean there in that last verse? Look at that first part. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. For those of you who are seasoned, I'm not going to say you're old, but for those of you who are seasoned in life, okay, you've lived long enough that you have wisdom. You don't just have knowledge and information, you have that, but you have wisdom because you know how that knowledge and information is supposed to be used. You know how it can be used so that it will work, And you know that if it's used this way, it's not going to work. And so you are looking back at younger generations and seeing them making decisions, or they're going down a road, or they're going down a path, and you know, ooh, it's not going to work. It's not going to turn out well. And so you try to share that wisdom. You try to impart that wisdom on younger generations. Sometimes they listen. Maybe most of the time they don't. So with much wisdom can come much sorrow when you see people continue to pursue paths that you know because of experience in life. Don't go that way. With more knowledge, he says, the more grief. You know, those who go through life and they're only satisfied when they can get a perfect, complete explanation for things. Or those who go through life and can only be satisfied when they can have absolute proof or an answer that you can find in a laboratory. They're always going to be unhappy in life for several reasons. First, this side of heaven, there are no explanations for some things. And God is not obligated to give us an explanation for everything. If he did, we probably still wouldn't understand it. Second, God has ordained that his people live by faith in his promises, not by absolute proof. Now, that doesn't mean he gives us no evidence. He gives us plenty of evidence. He gives us plenty of evidence to believe that he exists. He gives us plenty of evidence to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. But when the rubber meets the road, we are called to live by faith in his promises of things hoped for, of things not yet seen. Solomon tried to use all the knowledge and wisdom and resources that God gave him to figure it all out, to think through it all, to find an answer for everything. But even with all those resources, it didn't enable him to find an answer to everything. And at a certain point, all that wisdom and knowledge seemed to leave him more frustrated than anything else. Think about it. With every advance in technology and science that, humanity develops through the centuries, and those advancements, maybe they let us peek into the wonder of microscopic biology and understand the intricacies of the cell. Or those advances allow us to, get a better glimpse and understanding of the vastness of the universe. Even when those doors continue to open, every time the door opens, we're just presented with 1,000 new unanswered or unanswerable questions. Now, I'm not suggesting we quit trying to discover things through science and technology. We should do that. It's part of God's purpose for humanity. It's what we read about of the creation mandate in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. God wants us to develop the natural resources of the world that he has made, that he's placed us in, that he has made us stewards over, to discover God's thoughts after him. That brings him delight. But no matter how far our knowledge goes, no matter how far our understanding goes, it just makes us realize how much we don't know. It's like the psalm Solomon's father David wrote. Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. Increasing knowledge and understanding isn't the goal in and of itself. It's supposed to point us to something. It's supposed to point us to someone. It's supposed to point us to the glory of God and having a relationship with him, because he is the source of all knowledge and understanding. So what's the way to move forward in all this? What's the way to move forward in all this havel, this grabbing at smoke? How do we deal with the crushing cycle of time that Solomon talked about that eventually just erases us and erases most of the things that maybe we care about. First, just simply a warning from James, the brother of Jesus, especially for those who are young and think they've got all the time in the world. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, make money. Well, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are, that's interesting, a mist, a veil, just vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes. And he would go on to say, it's the will of the Lord should be your main concern. We cannot think tomorrow is guaranteed. So we have to live now. We have to live in the present for the Lord. We have to seek his will right now, not thinking about what's going to happen 5, 10, whatever years down the road. Make the most of this moment for the Lord. And second, the key to truly enjoying life is just accepting Havel. To live life with open hands, not closed fists grabbing at smoke. To acknowledge that almost everything in our lives is out of our control. About 6 different times, the book of Ecclesiastes, where it really gets the darkest, the teacher talks about the gift of God. And kind of the main thing we can pull from that, he talks about be present in the moment and enjoy the simple good things that God gives as gifts. A friendship, family, a good meal, a pleasant sunny day. Again, you and I can't control the most important things in our lives. As we talked about, nothing is guaranteed, and Solomon is kind of saying that's kind of the beauty of it, because it causes us to have to completely surrender and completely trust in God. And when we do that, when we get to that point, we can enjoy the present. We can be present in the moment, and we can enjoy life as we experience it, not as we think it ought to be.